So why am I telling you something about open source and about how Apache works? I'm an open source strategist at youre, which is my employer. But I'm also a member of the Apache Software Foundation, and that's why I'm standing right here, right now. I happen to be a board member. I'm co-founder of Apache Mahout, which was one of the first large-scale machine learning projects out there. I'm co-founder of Berlin Buzzwords. Please raise your hand if you know about this event. If you need an excuse to travel back to Berlin in June, when it's warm and sunny outside, to learn more about big data, Berlin Buzzwords is where you want to go. For Backstage, same excuse, same location, same time, but with a behind-the-scenes look at how open source projects work and how they are being governed. So why should you care why all those projects are, how those projects work? A lot of the technologies that you will be introduced to at DataWorks Summit actually is being developed under the umbrella of the Apache Software Foundation. If you're building your business and if you're building your infrastructure on these components, I bet you want to know how they are being run, how reliable they are being fixed with respect to security issues, how easy it is to get new features in, and in which way you can get a behind-the-scenes look behind what typical software vendors will show you on how these projects are being developed, on how strategy is being set. So as a baseline, the mission of the foundation itself is to provide software for the public good, and for that, support like-minded projects and communities of individuals. I've highlighted what I find important about that. It's communities of individuals. It's not a collaboration of different vendors. It's a collaboration of individuals. So what you do is to leave your employer hat at the door. So this is why I left my employer's hoodie right down here. I'm here just as an Apache person. It's a US charity established in 1999. So how many users of Apache projects do we have in the room? I want to see all of your hands. Pretty much? OK. I've been a user of these open source components for a long time. Usually, it doesn't take me very long to spot some deficiencies. Documentation isn't quite right. The implementation doesn't work quite as it's being advertised in the documentation. There's a law, Yonex law of patches. Yonex is a committer at Apache Lucene. A half-baked patch in Jira with no documentation, no tests, no backwards compatibility is better than no patch at all. So what you will end up doing is using these components, and what you can do is to take the source code, take the documentation, go back to the project, and fix what you don't like. And this is the first way to become a contributor. Do this often enough, and people will be annoyed by you and make you committer, so that they give you right access. How many committers to Apache projects do we have? 1, 2. OK. Those who decide whether you become a committer or not are the ones on the project management committee. They are not the ones giving technical direction. They are just there for project oversight. For anything they do, they still have to seek consensus. If you're involved with enough ASF projects or cross-foundational work, at some point someone will come up to you and tell you, congratulations, you're a new member of our foundations, do you want to join us? Right now, there's like 600 members. Those members are the ones who elect 9 directors. The goal and the mission of these directors is not, again, to set technical direction. They're there in order to ensure that projects are governed according to what we call the Apache way. They are there to ensure the running of the foundation. That is all the boring tasks that your typical coder doesn't want to do. They ensure a stable cash flow, that donations and fundraising works. They ensure that infrastructure works such that the history of our projects is ensured for the coming decades. In order to make that possible, there's a couple committees and offers who help run that foundation. Historically, those are the people who created that foundation like 19 years ago. It was born out of NCSA abandoning HTTP development, like the web server. That's probably where you know the brand Apache from the most. They got together, collaborated on a volunteer basis in order to continue development of this web server. And out of a need to have like a domain name where together, like to have a bank account, the foundation was created. This doesn't mean that nobody is paying for the development at this foundation. It doesn't mean that it's all altruistic and without commercial interest. However, it means that there is volunteer oversight. There are people who characterize the foundation as the Switzerland of open source, where different vendors can collaborate independently. How that is ensured is by a set of principles and collaboration guidelines. If you want to join the foundation as a project, you go through the incubator in order to learn that. We will see a relevant tour today. So first, the easy part. You have to make a decision which copyright the project that you want to use has. And if you publish, you will have to make a decision which copyright license to use. There's typically a large set of choices. At the ASF, that's made easier. There's just one choice, all is Apache license, all is commercial friendly. Doesn't mean it's easier for the projects, because for dependencies that they pull in, they will still have to make sure that they are compliant. And this is what the foundation does for you, namely the legal team. You will have to answer questions towards patents. I'm not going to talk about that right here. You will have to, once you go into open source, deal with the topic of trademarking. Why do you want, as a user, projects to be aware of trademarks? You don't want to have the case where there's two offerings and you don't know which is which. You want to be sure when you're downloading Hadoop that there is no malware in that binary. You want to make sure that there is nothing in there that doesn't belong to the Hadoop distribution. That's why projects are so picky about their trademarks. So let's continue with the messier people aspects of open source. The ASF states that community comes over code, essentially because a project without people is a dead project. What does community mean? You remember the hierarchies that I showed you earlier? It starts with the user. So it starts with everyone here in the room using projects in a big data space that come from the ASF. How do you typically learn about new projects? You learn about them going to DataWorks Summit. You may learn about them through social media. You may learn about them through the press. Speaking of the press, it's not only professionals talking to the press. The ASF provides training to its committers in order to enable them to talk to the press themselves. For each new release that's out there, there is motivation to go to press representatives and to talk about what's being worked on. Once you have those projects in production, you soon enough will come to the point where you need some kind of support, someone helping you out. There's tons of vendors that offer that support, but being here with my Apache hat on, my true and honest recommendation is each project has a mailing list. Yes, I know, I do have gray hair, so this is very dated technology. Go there is a user list, and typically people will be very helpful. Who is on those user lists? It's the people developing these projects. It's the engineers. So you go right to the people who know how to answer your question, assuming it's a technical question. So typically, you have mass media, you have people talking to each other. This doesn't scale well, so this is why we don't do that at the ASF. What we have is more like central hubs. Typically, each project has some level of mailing list activity, some level of activity on an issue tracker, and all of that is stored forever, publicly, searchable, and linkable. So there's a rule there. If it didn't happen on the mailing list, it didn't happen. any decision has to be taken on the mailing list. It's not only that you take the decision and you bring it to the mailing list, it's that you have to form consensus on this list in public. Otherwise, the decision wasn't made. What are those lists? Every project typically has a user list, user@projectname.apache.org, same for dev. Go there, ask your questions there. Yes, I know it's scary because it's all public, all searchable, all on Google, but people typically reply in a very friendly way. Now, if you don't want to subscribe to all those mailing lists, there is an interface there called PonyMail. It's lists.apache.org. Go there, log in with either your Apache ID or with your Google ID, and you can start chatting. Now, I've told you that all of the discussions happen in public. There's always an exception to the rule. People discussions, like new committers being voted in. This is not done in public, clearly. Security issues, of course, also aren't discussed in public. There's a security team dealing with that. Per project, typically, there's also people involved with this topic. Now, if you come to these projects and you tell them, hey, I want this great new feature, typically the answer is, patches welcome. And what this sounds like, if you hear this phrase for the first time, it sounds like someone's pushing you away. They don't want to do your work. What it really typically is, it's a request for help. Hey, I don't have the time to do this right now, but if you help me, this would be great, and I would be adding that. That's also why you typically won't hear a timeline when new features are going to be released. Most of these projects are volunteer organized, so patches welcome is a way to deal with expectation management. They won't make a promise on when a new feature will be shipped. Now, how are decisions really made? One way of making decisions is lazy consensus. I go out there and tell you I'm going to do X unless someone speaks up within the next 3 days. Silence means you agree. So if you agree, you don't have to do anything. If you've got some argument against it, you speak up, and we start discussing. If you want to make it more explicit, like if people are being voted in, you will see yes/no votes, +1, yes, I agree, -1, no, I don't agree, 0, I'm like, meh, don't care. But the way typically decisions are being made is that those who do the work are the ones who make the decisions. If you go to Apache infrastructure and tell them, I want this new service running for my project, the answer will typically be, yes, but you will have to help us make that happen. You will have to get involved. Remember that interface that I showed you for mailing list access? It's an Apache project in itself. It's called PonyMail. You can go to ponymail.apache.org. If you need some UI improvements, go to PonyMail and help that project. So now that I've convinced you to start working on these projects, here's the patch. What happens behind the scenes? If during your work time you make a patch, typically once it's submitted, the clock starts ticking. Context switches take time. You only have so much time that you can argue towards your manager to spend on an open source project. So these projects typically try to make it easy to get first feedback. I know that at least for Hadoop, first feedback is automated, where code style checks and unit test checks are automated, so you instantly get from CI a response to your patch. That doesn't mean that no human is looking at it. It just means that the obvious errors are being spotted automatically. And you can start working from there. That's, again, some input. Not only patches are valuable feedback. If you see patches related to functionalities that's interesting for you, do get started reviewing, give feedback. That's also a valuable contribution. So how are people being motivated to work on that? How do projects keep you motivated, keep you coming back? You can motivate me with chocolate. I know another attendee of DataWorks Summit who can be bribed with Berlin chocolate. But really what does happen is that people will say thank you. Well, how does that help? For my first open source patch, what I received was a thank you in the Jira ticket, including my name. a thank you in the commit message, including my name, and thank you in the release notes, including my name. I could take all of this public evidence, go back to my manager and tell him, hey, look, we've done an open source contribution. He could go back to his clients and show how open source savvy our company was. That's how this public feedback and thank you typically works. Plus, typically in a good project, you will not get thank you, but you will get a qualified thank you for X because Y. Why? Because this tells you where to continue contributing, and it raises motivation quite a bit. So contributions at Apache are not only source code. They also include documentation. They also include constructive bug reports, constructive discussions, support with marketing, and generally anything that adds value to the project. Helping users out on the list is a valuable contribution. For all of that, you acquire merit, and merit doesn't go away. What does that mean? Once you're a committer at a project, at some point you may end up being in a life phase where you cannot contribute on a continuous basis anymore, so you say, I'm going emeritus, just suspend my account, it's fine. Maybe 3 years later, you're in a different situation where now you've got time again, and you say, hello, I want to continue, and there you are, without having to prove again that you know how things work. You just remain within this community. Now, merit only goes so far. Especially if you have people who are contributing a lot after hours, there is a risk of them losing interest, but also of them burning out. So what I typically tell projects is to watch out for people who spend more than what seems healthy and to go out and ask. What that means for the user is, if you find yourself in a difficult situation, try to make this as transparent as possible. It doesn't need to be on a public list. Just reach out to those who you see most active in the project. Typically, they can find you ways in order to find more sustainable funding for what you do for that project. Speaking of money, you will end up wearing multiple hats. I'm working for Europace, that's one hat. I'm a board member at the Apache Software Foundation, that's another hat. I'm a committer at Apache Mahoots, that's another hat. Make sure that people know which hat you're wearing when you're speaking. Back at Berlin Buzzwords, one conference I'm running here in Berlin on big data, had a keynote speaker give a talk about the deficiencies of Hadoop community-wise. He made the mistake of using a slide master from his employer. It took a long time for the audience to gain trust that he was actually talking on behalf of the Hadoop project and not trying to advertise his employer's Hadoop solution. The change that he made after that was that typically he would enter the stage with a hat on his head for his employer and remove it if he was speaking on behalf of the project. So make that visible. That goes very deep to an understanding at Apache where you participate as an individual. You leave your vendor's hat at the door. So at Apache, what do you pay with? You pay with time and love. You don't pay with money. You cannot set project direction by paying money to the foundation or handing money to the project itself. You can hand money to someone who then spends time there, yes, but you cannot pay the project. If you contribute enough, keep in mind that there is something like physical health. I do know people who went through surgery to get their arms back into a more healthy state. That doesn't hurt anymore. Make sure to keep your volunteeritis in check. I do know people who have been volunteering too much, who have been taking on too much work. Open source people tend to be very good at motivating you, at pulling you in. At some point, you need to say no to that, and you need to know where your limit is. So, you pay with time and love, right? Well, mostly. There are a few things where even the ASF needs money for. They need machines to host infrastructure. They need people to take care of these machines. They've got a press, legal, administration, travel support, and trademark team. And at least legal and trademarks typically involves lawyers. Yes, there is pro bono support, but at the scale of the ASF, at some point you need to take money and hand it over. This is what donations go into, both corporate donations as well as individual donations. Something else that's important about the ASF is that you are not alone. There are all those individual project communities, but a lot of the topics, they appear over and over. What I would like to invite you to do is to join DevEd community at apache.org. Yes, again, a mailing list. This is where collaboration topics are being discussed. This is where you can bring business topics. Right now, this mailing list is very, very active. Why so? Because currently, Google Summer of Code is going on. So what Google does is they put up a program where they are setting aside some money. Open source organizations can apply to Google to get a summer student working on their projects. The student is being paid by Google, assuming the project says yes, the student succeeded. Typically, projects have to go to Google. At the ASF, that's what the foundation does on behalf of the projects. There's like 40, 50, 60 seats, and these seats are being distributed across these students. All of the administrative work, all of the coordination with the GSOC program is being done on behalf of the projects. There's other lists. If you're a member of the ASF, you can go to members@apache.org. That's a privately archived list where you can discuss topics that you don't want to see published on Google. It's still 600 members reading this list across all industries and across all vendors. So it's not, I don't want to call it private, but it's at least not Google archived. If you want to talk more about how those projects work, come to ApacheCon. We're going to have Apache Roadshow here in June in Berlin. We're going to have ApacheCon North America and Montreal in September. Plus, you can join FOSS Backstage if you want to learn how other projects are doing that as well. So what am I talking about? Which topics are typically the same all over the place? At some point, you will have to deal with project growth. As soon as you're commercially successful, you will have a team internally work on these projects. How do you get these people in? How do you make it still possible for some independent person to contribute and to become active and to gain influence? At some point, you may have to deal with poisonous people entering your project, taking time away, either trolling the project or with very good intent, but not being very helpful to the project. The talks that you want to look at there are from Brian Fitzpatrick and Ben Collins-Sussman on dealing with poisonous people, but there's a lot of other wisdom within the foundation as well on how to deal with people issues. Speaking of community ties, the ASF as a whole has a lot of people involved and has active ties to other communities and neighboring projects. They have ties towards OpenJDK, think Lucene reporting back JVM failures to the OpenJDK project, consistently crashing the JDK once there is a new release. Think of distributions like Debian, think of Docker, even think of the WC3. Another common topic that projects have to deal with is like coming up with a succession plan and with an exit strategy. When I created Berlin Buzzwords back in 2010, it took me 5 years to get rid of this project without killing the project, just handing it over to someone new. So there are people at Apache who know how handover works, and they know that at some point you have to build handover into how you work on a daily basis. It doesn't work to say, I'm not going to work anymore, you are my successor. Then you're like, what am I supposed to do? So I hope what I made clear is that open source is a little bit more than just the source code. If you're even just mildly interested, I would like to invite you truly to come back in June for FOSS Backstage. We will have quite a few ASF board members there to talk about how things work. Plus, we will have lots of coffee breaks, lunch sessions, where you can interact on your issues and on your questions. Plus, I would like to invite you to join us in Montreal in September. If you're as much a fan of traveling as me, I typically prefer to have people come to my city and not fly around the world, my true and honest invitation would be to join your project's mailing list. It would be dev@projectname.apache.org or user@projectname.apache.org. You don't have to be active. Just start listening in. It will take half a year until you see recurring questions and you will feel an urge to answer these questions. Is that helpful? Sure. Because now the committers don't have to answer. It's you who is answering on behalf of them. So suddenly they have multiplied themselves. It won't take very long until you will find that something in the documentation or something in the implementation is not quite right. And once you've spent half a year, maybe just a couple months on that project, it will be much more of a natural move to fix things. There's a warning, though. It's very hard to get out of this ecosystem once you're there. Because what Apache does is that it follows you from employer to employer and from job to job. So this is something that remains stable. Now, back yesterday, I promised that I would explain what cookie cutters have to do with the ASF. I created FOSS Backstage, or the idea of FOSS Backstage, back in April, May last year. There were people telling me that there would be no ApacheCon in 2007 in Europe. And I was like, I've got a new employer, they've got space for 200 people. Let's do at least a little meetup in Berlin. There was someone coming back to me, if we do this meetup in November, and there's no more than 40 people, I'm going to bake cookies. I said, okay, if there's more than 40 people and you bake 40 cookies, then I'm going to make another 40 cookies, that makes 80. Plus, if someone volunteers to create an STL file of the ASF feather as a cookie cutter, I will make you ASF feather cookies. What happened was that a day later, I had an STL file coming from Sydney to my inbox with a cookie cutter. 2 weeks later, I went to Open Source Summit in Prague, first with cookies, but also to meet this person from Sydney, who then brought me printed cookie cutters. So the first 3 asking me questions after my talk, I've got cookie cutters for you. And with that, I would like to finish my slides with an invitation to join the ASF and to join all those projects. Thank you. Cookie cutters. Anyone? Yes, go ahead. Can you take the mic, please? Can you take? There's one right in front of you. This one, right? Oh, right.
Okay. So do I have to ask a question before I get the cookie cutter? All right. I'm very new to this whole Apache. My introduction to this is on Apache Metron. Mm-hmm. So a couple of questions. I still don't understand the difference between a committer and a contributor. And second is, so we are a software technology firm, and when we take this project and enhance, how do we contribute it back to the community, and what's the process behind it?
Process is easy. You join the list.
Yeah.
You check what the project actually needs.
Okay.
What your typically engineer will do is go out, hack a patch together, and send it there. I don't know how Metron works. It could be on GitHub with a pull request, or it could be with a patch to Jira. I'm not quite on, every project at CSF does it a little bit different. What I would advise people to do is to not spend huge amounts of time to work on such a patch and then contribute it, because it's very frustrating if then a committer comes back to you and tells you, no, we don't want to support this feature. What I actually want to do is to go on list and to ask, hey, we want to work on that. What's your suggestion? And then it all comes back to Yonex law of patches. Share work in progress. as early as you can. Don't wait for the polished version. Like back in 2005 or 6, I was working myself on a patch for Nudge. Being a young student, inexperienced back then, scared of making my mistakes open, I was waiting forever to get the patch out, which ended up being never. Share it early on, then people can give you feedback, and people can also spot where you didn't get things quite right. And typically, people will mentor you through.
Is that response very, how long does it take to get a response back?
Hours?
Hours.
Typically hours. Within hours, someone typically will speak up.
Okay. Great, thank you.
If nobody speaks up within hours, wait a couple of days and then ping back.
Okay. And how do you move from a committer to a contributor?
Contributor is easy. You just put work in. To move from a contributor to someone who has write access, that again is different from project to project, but typically the way to do it is to put more time and love into the project, and at some point people will pick up. Okay. And typically if you go to the project website, they will have a link how to contribute, talking you through all the mechanics, and typically they also will have a page how to become a committer, and they will list what they expect from you. It won't be like you need to do 10 patches and you need to do 3 reviews. It will be more like you have to show consistent effort.
Okay, thank you.
Any more questions? Yes?
Hi, you mentioned meetups for each project. Are there frequent meetups? Are there people who coordinate, for example, an Apache Metron meetup where we can start meeting people face-to-face in our own city?
So the way I've seen it work is that someone like you steps up. I want to meet up in my city. The only thing you have to get clearance on is if you can use the trademark of the project. The way you typically would do that is, or the way you typically would start that process is to go to the dev or user list and say, hey, we want to do a meetup. Can we call it that way? And then you often can get started. Okay. There's like no central organization. There are people within Apache that can give you best practices because there's a lot of people who have done meetup organization. You can find them either on your projects list, or you can again go to dev@community.apache.org and find people there who will help you out. Any other questions? Yes?
Can you say something about your most or the most valuable project that has been delivered by the community and why it was so successful?
So the question was around the most valuable project, and honestly, in my personal opinion, every single project does have its own value, which cannot be compared. So any project at the ASF, as far as in my definition, is alive because it's valuable to its users, and because there are users who are willing and volunteering to step up and to help this project. Yes?
On that question, you have top-level projects and others.
Yes.
Does this not imply a higher level of value, of support, of longevity, of life?
Not quite so. So there's a difference between projects in the incubator and what we call top-level projects. Top-level projects only means that these are the projects that have left the incubator successfully. And the bar, in order to leave this incubator, you have shown that you can do a release, which matches with our guidelines in terms of license, in terms of IP provenance, etc. You have shown that you can grow the community. You have shown that you can work in a vendor-neutral way, etc. This is the difference. So it's not in terms of value, but it's in terms of if you rely on an incubator project today, there is a caveat that these projects are still learning how to do things. Whereas the TLP, like for the incubator projects, they are also being more or less actively mentored. Each of these projects has 3 ASF members who are helping them get up to speed. Like, how does this work to have all communication online? How does that work to make all decisions on the mailing list? Pulling people back if they are making decisions next to the coffee machine, which happens if you have more than one committer in one company. Once the people on the project have understood that, they will move out and become a top-level project. Does that make things clearer? Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. One more. I want all the cookie cutters.
I want pictures from the cookies back on Twitter.
Yeah, my wife bakes very well. There are lots of projects, and it's very tempting to use lots of projects. Is there a way, in your opinion, how can I judge, if you like, the health of a project? If I'm going to make a commitment within my company to start using open source, I don't want to be faced with the problem in 18 months that suddenly I've committed to something which appears to be dead.
So my first recommendation would be each of the top-level projects is supposed to hand in a quarterly board report that deals with project health, that puts a spotlight on project health. All of those board reports are publicly available. You go to whimsy.apache.org, and you can click through. Oh, I don't have connectivity here. You can come to me after the talk. You go to Whimsy, you can see all of the reports, and you can read up on all of the projects, how well things are going. Apart from that, again, my general recommendation is have a closer look at the projects, at what the discussions look like on the mailing list, on what the diversity in terms of who's committing code looks like. Typically, all of the committers are being made public, so the membership of each project is public, so you can check their affiliation. You can reach out to people, and you can see on the project's issue tracker how fast issues are being created as opposed to closed. You don't want to look at how many issues are open at any point in time, but you can look at the opening versus closing rate. In general, take a closer look at the project communication. So this is the one behind-the-scenes look that you get. So typically at closed source projects, you don't see. You see what's actually going on. There was another question over here.
How many people or individuals are part of this today?
So there's 9 directors, there's 600 members, there's around 6,000 committers, and around 60,000 contributors. And yes, it's growing. Statistics are online, some are findable publicly. That's the funny thing about the ASF. Pretty much everything is public, except for people issues, except for security issues, except for legal, finance-y stuff. Okay, if there are no more, oh, there's one more.
When a company is a little bit concerned about using Apache software in production because of legal terms, because of there are a lot of dependencies for Hadoop, Spark, and something like that, can the Apache Foundation help? Some consultants or something like that?
So the first thing I would advise you to do is to go to the project itself and ask there. I'm sure that there are people who can provide you with arguments.
Okay.
I'm sure that there are people who are willing to be hired either as a consultant or as working for you and helping you out.
Okay.
The other thing that you can do is to go out of your project's mailing list and again go to DevEd community and ask there where across projects people are participating.
Okay. But when you take, for example, HortonWorks stack, that's a lot of different projects in the complete stack.
Sure.
Is someone at HortonWorks
I'm not a
Alright, cool.
Hortonworks person.
I don't know. Okay,
I'm not internal there.
okay, thanks.
If there's no more questions, I've got the cookie cutters for you. Thank you.